and welcome to this video. So as I said in the previous video, we will now continue with the implementation of our tests for the invalid input. So in the previous video, we started updating our classes so that we can now receive an error or a bunch of errors as the parameters or as the arguments to the invalid input constructor. And internally, we will store these errors within our one protected variable called errors. And this is because we don't want to make the raw errors available outside of this class, but we want the user to access them via the serialized input or serialized error output. So in this video, we will continue then writing our unit tests and extending our production code so that it can handle the functionality that is required from our unit test. So once I have the serialized errors, right? So the invalid input here is going to give us an instance of the invalid input error, and then here I can have my serialized errors to be this invalid input error dot serialized error output. And the first thing I want to receive, if you watched the previous video, the first thing I want to have is I want to have an errors key, and this I would want to have of a length 1. Why is it so? Because I have an array with one entry here. So the idea, actually, no, 1 second. If in the previous video that structure is followed, then we will virtually always have an array of length 1 for the invalid input, because we would like to return a message, something similar to this: user input does not match validation criteria, and then add the errors in the fields, right? So, but nonetheless, I want to have the errors as an array of length 1. And of course, this is going to fail the tests, because right now what returns here is an unknown. So I really don't have any idea of what's coming via the errors. So these tests, of course, they cannot pass. So we need to go and we need to start implementing now how we want the serialized error output to look like. So let's create a folder here, and it's going to be called types. And this is where I'm going to store all the types that are common to my errors. Okay, so this is going to be serialized error output .ts. And here I will simply export a type of serialized error output, and it's going to be of some shape. This is going to have an array of possible errors. Right, so actually, sorry, the errors key here is going to have an array of possible errors. Then each error may contain a message, which is going to be a string, may not. It's required to contain a message, okay? That is a string, and it may contain some fields. And these fields are going to have to be strings. So say, for example, how do I type this? I would write key is of type string, and here I want to have an array of strings assigned or associated with this attribute. So it will accept only strings as attributes or as keys to this object, and then each of them has to have an associated array of strings. And notice that if you type a number while building the object, so TypeScript or JavaScript is going to internally convert this to a string, right? So even if I type something like this, for example, type const sum var, and I write something like this: 1 2 3 is nice. Then this 1 2 3 internally is going to be translated into a string. You see now here that it's marked as a string. So this is not very strict, it's not a very strict check, but it at least gives us an idea of what to expect here. So while this would be fine to be defined like this, I actually prefer to break this down a little bit. So let's start by defining a serialized error field. And this is going to be what we want to have. So this fields here is also going to be an array, right? I can, no, sorry, it's not going to be an array. So this is going to be keys with an array of errors, right? So this is not going to be an array of strings. It's going to be a bunch of keys containing my errors, right? So this, I think, is a scalable enough way of us for us to handle this approach. So the field is going to look like this. I'm just extracting and putting it in their own type so that it's easier if we want to reference this type later on in the future. So later on we can simply import it from here. If we have everything nested, then I cannot take a subtype, or I cannot take an internal type here. So I just want to export everything, and this would probably be something called serialized error, right? And this is going to contain a message and the field that we had here before, and then my errors is going to be an array of serialized error. Good. So now we have defined the output that we want to have from this function here. Where is it? In the base custom error. So I want the serialized output, the serialized error output, to produce a serialized or an object of type serialized error output. So let me import this here at the top, and immediately the invalid input error is going to start complaining because the serialized error output is not working correctly, right? The types are not, we cannot convert between these types. So if I simply mark this as serialized error output, then I get rid of the error above, but now I get to the one that is harder to solve, that my errors array, or the errors parameter that is received by my constructor, does not have the same shape as the serialized error output. So I need to reshape the errors into a shape that conforms with the serialized error output. So here the tests will still fail because I am not doing anything to convert, but at least the serialized errors here, they also disappeared, right? So the error disappeared because now I know that the serialized error output is going to output, or is going to return, an object of shape serialized error output, and this serialized error output has to contain a key called errors, right? If I look here, it's errors, and then we have an array of serialized error. So let's get started with the interesting part, that is to solve the problem of parsing the error output. And this I'm going to create, so for that I'm going to create a private function. And I'm not sure whether ESLint, so whether linting is going to complain about this, but because I'm defining the function after calling it, but because it's a class, I don't remember if it's the case that it complains. So it may be the case that it also doesn't complain. So here I will pass the validation errors, parse the validation errors. And as a result, I want to have the serialized error output, right? So this is the object I want to receive in the end. Sorry, there's a typo here. Of course, this is not working because here I am not doing anything inside. But afterwards, I want to simply return this.parse validation errors, and then this here, the serialized error output, is going to stop complaining. And now my job is to start implementing the parse validation errors function. So here, as you may expect, within the, let me open the type again, it's here. So within the type, I'm going to have an errors key, and this key is going to contain, it is going to point to an object, right? This object, or is going to point to an array of objects, and each of these objects has the shape that it has to contain a message, and it may contain a couple of fields. So let's begin by simply returning here errors, and this is going to be an array, an array of objects, which has to contain, at least one has to contain the message that something went wrong. So here we will implement the similar message here. So input, let's change this a little bit. Let's put input does not match validation criteria. And this is going to be returned here. Now you see that, well, it can be made static because I make no reference to this, but I will actually make a reference to this in the future because I need to parse the error, so I'm not going to make it static. So this should be enough, I believe, to make our errors pass. Our tests pass. And exactly, because whenever I expect my serialized errors to have a length of 1, I'm already satisfying this by sending a simple object. So let's go back to our tests, because now our tests are passing, which means we should not write any additional production code. And let's continue with our implementation, because now what we want to test here is that I want my fields to actually have some values defined. So here this would be serialized errors 0. All right, and here what I'm saying is basically I'm just destructuring the fields argument or the fields attribute from my first errors here in this array. So if I look maybe at, I don't know if I can hover over this. No, so this is an array of serialized error, which means that, if I come to the definition of the serialized error, each element of that array is going to have a message field for sure, and it may have a fields attribute or a fields key. So because it may have, I want to pass a default to these fields. Why do I want to pass a default? Because I don't want to be checking, doing a lot of if statements within jest. I want jest to think, okay, if the field is not populated, I will just assume it to be an empty object. And this is going to be good enough for our tests. So the idea here, let's write the first test. We want to expect the serialized errors at the spot 0 message to equal, and this is somehow self-asserting, but let's maybe change the message here just for us to have the test failing. The input provided is invalid, right? Something like this. And then this is going to fail, and we will update this message within our invalid input object. So the message here is going to be this one. Actually, let's make this even better, and let's write a protected here, or even a private. We can have a private here, private error message, and this is going to be this. And then here I can simply mark this as this.error message. This.error message. And within the constructor, I'm not sure whether I can already mark this.error message. No, it complains that I cannot use this within, and it also complains about this error message. So let's leave it as it was before. And I will just copy this error message, and I'm going to pass it here. This super call here, it doesn't really influence anything in our tests. The important thing is to have the error message here, for example, and then we return this.error message. If we want to, otherwise we can just return a string, but it can also be the case that we want to use this error message somewhere else. So now it, of course, passes because the message is the same. But now I also have another test, and I would like expect serialize fields. So let's actually not this, expect fields, right? I would like to have these fields here. So in this case, I'm passing an error that has one param, and I would like this to be the field that contains a string of error messages. So I would like the keys of my object fields, object.keys to have length of 1, and this is going to fail because my fields have no length whatsoever. They are an empty object. So now I need to go back to my implementation of the invalid input and of the parsing of the validation errors, so that I can continue with the implementation that is going to give me the final logic. So here, to begin with, I would like to start by defining a parsed errors, and this is going to be an object of the type serialized error field. Where is it? Here. And it's going to be an object to begin with, and we'll see why do I need that. So let me just adjust the imports here. I was checking them and I just saw that the order is a little bit wrong. So now I want to add to the parsed errors. Here what I want to do is I want to add to the parsed errors the key for my field and any messages that have the same key of that field. So let me go back here and let's think that I have another problem here, and the password has two violations. So valid12, valid12, and here we say that password must contain an uppercase letter. So now I would like to have as a result something like this. I'll delete this soon, but in my fields I would like to have password, and then I would like to have an array, and within this array I would like to have these two messages, right? The two messages that can be violating our validation criteria. So I need to take something that has this shape and I need to transform into something that has this shape, right? So let's write a function that is going to do that for us. And here I'm skipping a little bit over the tests. Maybe I just write all the tests here, because I would like to have I would like to go into the implementation and stop jumping around code and implementation. Maybe this gives a worse flow for you who's watching the video and also needs to be coming and going. So I would just be a little bit, skip a little bit the principles that we discussed. So I would like the fields dot, and I'm not sure here what is going to be the case. I'm pretty sure that it's going to throw me an error, but exactly, let me do something a little bit different. I will just call object dot keys in the fields dot to equal. I think that to equal is enough because I have only password here, right? I have only password. So now I'm expecting the object dot keys to have a length of 1, and this is superfluous now, because if object dot keys for fields equals the password, then of course I have a field, of course I have a length 1. So another thing that I want to have is I want to expect fields.password to have length of 2, right? So I have two different errors here, and based on what we discussed previously, the result would contain a key of password, and in that key we would have two array or two strings containing my or composing my array of errors. And here I would like to say that also fields.password.toContain, and that will be my first error, right? That's going to be my first error, and then I will also do the same for my second error. And this is just to ensure that the errors are being passed down correctly. So now I have a bunch of tests that I want to make it pass, and for that I need to go back to my function in the invalid input and parse these errors. So how do I parse these errors? I think, well, there is a multitude of ways. If you can see a way that is more efficient than my way, then by all means go ahead. But I think that a fair enough or a good enough approach is to first check if this dot errors and this dot errors dot length is greater than 0. Then I'm gonna enter in this array, and I'm gonna start parsing the errors. And then I need to, for each of the errors that I have, so this the errors dot for each, this is going to be an error, and this is going to be of type, I think it doesn't tell me exactly the type, but it should be a validation error, right? So maybe if I just wrap this around, exactly. Now it tells me validation error. So it's telling me the type here. Maybe it was telling me before. Yes, it was telling me before here as well, just didn't see it. So I have an error, and then what I want to do is, if the key for that error is already defined, then I want to add that error message to the array that is attributed, that is linked to that key. So if parsed errors, and then here I need to check for the error.param. If this exists, then I'm going to enter in this if statement, and then I'm going to have this, and I'm going to push the error.msg. Oops, MSG, right? Else, if this is not defined, I will create here. So let me just copy and paste. I will initialize this as an array containing as the first element error.msg. And this is all we need to do to parse our input. And then I can here in the fields simply return the parsed errors. It's just missing a comma. So this should be enough for us to make all the tests pass. Exactly. Now everything is passing as expected, and we have a much better way of ensuring that we have a consistent output for that error message, or for the error messages that we are going to have. So it can also be the case, of course, that in the future we'll change this interface. We are still early in development, so we can change this later on. But for the moment, I think this is a good enough structure for us to continue. So all the tests are passing. Let me run the command prettier fix and adjust our files, and then let's see what linting is telling us that we need to fix. I don't really pay that much attention to the, oh, nothing. Okay, that was unexpected. That's very nice. So I normally don't pay attention to the linting rules. I mean, maybe you saw that I changed a little bit the order of the imports because I know that it complains about this. But in general, I tend to implement the code, and the stylistic properties of it I leave for later, right? I just run the linting and I know it's gonna catch this, and it's for sure it has a better chance of catching my mistakes than if I were to focus on it all the time and slow down development. So let me add the changes. I will commit this as the feature for the authentication. And in this case, I think we can call this implement unit tests for the invalid input error, right? So now give it a couple of seconds. It's going to run all the pre-commit hooks, and then we'll be able to push this to our remote hippo. Git push. And I will add the link to this commit. So I don't know if you already noticed, but I already started adding the links to the commits to the video description so that you can follow exactly what I did, and you can have the exact changes that were done during each of the videos. Good. Then we will continue in the next video with our implementation of errors and our sign up. We will probably start soon, very soon, talking about hashing the password. So for now, thank you very much for your time, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.